Welcome to the Muslim Women Australia International Women's Day event for 2024, Sowing the Seeds, More Than Numbers. My name is Neemat Kabutli. I manage the Linking Hearts Multicultural Family Violence and Homelessness Service here at MWA, and it is indeed my honour to be your MC for today. This year, MWA will not be celebrating International Women's Day as we usually do. Instead, we will commemorate the day and mark it as a day to continue to amplify the voices that speak up about truth and justice. Before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, live and work, and pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. Across Australia, wherever we are joining from today, we recognise that these are unceded lands. Internationally, we see that nations impacted by colonisation continue to deal with the imbalances of power and dispossession, and thus we extend that acknowledgement with recognition to the 75 years of occupation of the Palestinian people. Today's forum will highlight and unpack the specific impact of the current crisis in Palestine, its impact on women, and the way in which certain constructs are minimised, contextualised, and conditional. We do have a jam-packed program today, commencing with opening remarks from MWA CEO Hajeh Maha Abdo, an overview of the Seeds of Resistance Preliminary Report, a keynote address and launch of this report by the esteemed Dr. Helen McCue, as well as accounts of personal lived experience from women here in Australia, in Gaza, and across the diaspora that highlight how the situation in Palestine, which at this stage has been described by the International Court of Justice as plausibly genocidal, has had a significant impact on communities worldwide, including Australia. MWA has for 40 years provided immediate support and unwavering assistance to individuals as they grapple with the dual challenges of witnessing distressing events in their homeland and facing prejudice in their living environments, while working towards broader societal change, aiming to combat racism, Islamophobia, and misinformation, and foster a more inclusive and understanding world. This long-standing commitment to community, which we respond to local and global needs, commenced at the time of the Gulf War, continued throughout the protracted war on terror, and now with the genocide in Gaza, the work of organisations such as ours are more vital than ever. Usually, MWA invites elected representatives to partake in our International Women's Day program. This year, however, we have chosen not to do so to reflect community sentiment. However, we do have some elected representatives here today as attendees, and should they have any feedback or follow-up, we do welcome hearing from them. In our line of work, providing settlement support, and particularly as a domestic violence service provider, as professionals that support women and their children seek safety, we understand the insidious nature of power, abuse, racism, and violence. The dynamics of violence mirror each other at the micro and the macro levels, across gendered violence and state-sanctioned violence. And in fact, gendered violence is exacerbated under conditions of oppression, conflict, and disasters. Across the women's safety sector, there is a well-known acronym that refers to a tactic used by perpetrators that is highly effective at perpetuating the psychosocial conditions of coercion, dehumanization, and violence. It works by shifting blame and avoiding accountability. That acronym is DAVO. It stands for Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender. I call upon you to reflect on how many times have you seen this tactic used, whether personally, professionally, socially, systemically, both publicly and privately. Because this tactic becomes ineffective only when it is recognised. And we must be better at recognising and responding. We at MWA recognise that wherever there is oppression, people, including children, will resist and respond. And I call upon you to take a moment to consider these terms, resistance and dignity, as defined by leading expert Dr. Alan Wade and his colleagues at the Centre for Response-Based Practice, and our dear and esteemed colleagues here in New South Wales at Insight Exchange. What is resistance? For every act of violence by a perpetrator, there is an act of resistance by the targeted person or group of people. In the context of violence, including domestic, family and sexual violence, racism and genocidal violence, resistance is often covert. It may look like appeasing the perpetrator, keeping your head down, skillfully choosing not to speak up. It may look like freezing your body, These are examples of covert resistance, and these subtle acts are used by survivors to increase their safety and dignity. What is dignity? All acts of violence, humiliation, violation, abuse, and discrimination are attacks on human dignity, human worth, human belonging, well-being, and safety. As much as people resist violence, they resist indignity and humiliation. When we listen for and celebrate survivors' skillful resistance to violence and abuse, we honor and uphold their dignity and their innate divinity. Upholding dignity is also a core value in Islam. It is at the very heart of our Islamic teachings. For these reasons, this event and the Seeds of Resistance survey and preliminary report has a focus on honoring the inherent dignity of Palestinian, Muslim, and Arab people. It is from this position of honor and strength we reclaim our ability to use such terms without prejudice, and we invite you to open your mind and transform your heart when hearing from our lineup of incredible speakers. Our first speaker likely needs no introduction, but for those who may not be aware, Hajeh Maha Krayem Abdo OAM is a passionate advocate for social justice and uses the common language of faith to clarify in the community how Islam regards justice and equality. She serves as the CEO of Muslim Women Australia, a representative body for Muslim women working to enrich humanity, advocating for equality and the rights of all women through authentic leadership based on our Islamic principles. In 2022, Maha received an honorary fellow from the Western Sydney University and was appointed as a panel member of the New South Wales Treasurer's Women's Economic Opportunities Review. In 2021, Maha was awarded the Committee for Sydney Unsung Hero Award. In 2015, she was a finalist for the Australian Human Rights Commission Human Rights Medal. And in 2014, she was the New South Wales Human Rights Ambassador. It is with deep respect and admiration that I welcome Hajeh Maha Abdo OAM to share her opening remarks on reflections on this year's International Women's Day theme, Count Her In.
Thank you, Namat, and sincerely appreciate all of us coming together on this virtual settings where I think this is the connection of the hearts, beyond our body, beyond it crosses all boundaries. So on that, I want to start off with just saying, sincerely acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we have been privileged to be accepted in. Those people, those Indigenous people that have come before us, their sacrifices, those that are with us now, and those that will come after us. It just gives me that deep sense of gratitude for not just acknowledging, but recognizing the pain of the land that we sit under reminds me of the rubble of where women are sitting under in Palestine right now. The pain of every land, especially the land of Palestine, where Gaza and Rafah are going through right now. So please open up your hearts, renew your intention, and come with us on this very, very, very important aspect of what it means for us to be here on International Women's Day. So starting off with our Islamic greetings of peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And a warm welcome on this day, International Women's Day 2024, where we will inshallah launch the Sowing the Seeds of Resistance, a preliminary report shedding light on the sentiments surrounding the plausible genocide in Gaza, Palestine. Today, as we come together with a heavy heart on the precipice, and I'll use that word, precipice, of International Women's Day under the theme of Count Her In, our hearts are heavy, our minds are focused, and our commitment to justice burns brighter than ever. But I want to just take you with me on the term, why I chose the term precipice, as I find it carries a profound meaning right now, as it signifies a dangerous edge, a threshold between hope and devastation. In the context of Gaza, it symbolizes the precarious existence of its people, particularly the women who bear the brunt of the violence and hardship. As we stand on this metaphorical precipice, we must confront the uncomfortable truth that silence and indifference only propel us closer to the abyss of complicity. I must admit, it is not a day of celebration for us, but rather a solemn commemoration. We gather here together from all walks of life, not to acknowledge women as new statistics, but to honour their resilience, courage, and unwavering spirit in the face of adversity. Today, as we are confronted with more painful reality of a genocide in Gaza, a crisis that demands our attention, empathy, and real action, we need to reflect on this history of International Women's Day, but I'm not going to give you a history of International Women's Day as is. But just 50 years to this day, here in New South Wales, remembering those brave feminist women in Sydney who were raising their voices for the first time ever 50 years ago in support of women escaping violence, domestic violence. Their fight for freedom from violence and the right to make their own choices resonates with me and with the struggles of Palestinian women today. Let us honour these feminist women of 50 years who are still very, very brave till today, their legacy and their courage by standing in solidarity with Palestinian women, advocating for their rights and demanding an end to the injustices they face. Together, we can sow the seeds of resistance and pave the way to the future where all women, regardless of their nationality or circumstances, can live with dignity and equality. In the pursuit of justice and accountability, Muslim Women Australia embarked on a survey, the result of which will be presented to you today, where we've sought to understand how people around the world are feeling about the heartbreaking, horrific war that is unfolding right in front of our eyes in Palestine, in particular in Gaza. The preliminary report of Sowing the Seeds for Resistance reflects the collective sentiments of people and those who stand in solidarity with the innocent lives caught in the human rights violation to freedom, to live with justice and equality. As we delve into these findings, let us not forget that behind every number, every statistic, there lies a human being, a woman, a man, a child, with dreams, aspirations, and inherent right to live in peace with dignity and justice. It is our duty to ensure their voices are heard, their stories are acknowledged, and their struggles of 75 years of occupation is not just recognised, but where world leaders come together to cease fire now and implement equality and justice for all. On this International Women's Day, we must acknowledge the interconnectedness of our global community. Our responsibility transcends borders and affiliations. We must stand united, not just as Muslim women, but as compassionate human beings, demanding justice and accountability for those who perpetrate acts of violence and potential genocide. It is disheartening to witness the suffering of Palestinian women, men, and children who endure the consequences of a conflict not of their own making. Yet in the face of adversity, we find hope in their resilience of being Palestinian, those people with their unwavering hope and spirit. As advocates for justice, all of us sit here. It is our duty to amplify the voices of those who are silenced, to shed light on the injustices faced by Palestinian people. We must hold accountable those responsible. To uphold the dignity of Palestinian women, men, and children, we must take collective action. This action requires us to engage with our communities, governments, and international organisations. We must challenge the misinformation, advocate for diplomatic solutions, and support initiatives that promote peace and justice in the region. Moreover, we must urge our leaders to address the root causes of this conflict and work towards a just and lasting resolution. Let us not be passive observers and just bystanders. Let's be active participants in the pursuit of a world where every individual, regardless of their background, can live free from oppression, fear, and violence. And on this International Women's Day of 2024, let it be a day where we be a catalyst for change. Let it be a day where we can commit ourselves to the cause of justice, equality, and human dignity. Let's come together where we can sow the seeds of resistance against oppression and stand in solidarity with Palestinian people. Let us count every woman, every man, and every child in our pursuit of a world where justice prevails and peace will reign. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Hajeh Maha, for your inspirational words and for your paving the way for so many of us here across Australia and abroad. We at MWA do recognise our own privilege, and we recognise our own involvement within the systems that perpetuate some of these circumstances. And so we wanted to allow you to hear directly from those who are more than capable of speaking for themselves. Please listen to Daiana Al-Bukhari, a Palestinian in Gaza who was recently displaced, to share her perspectives on International Women's Day.
Salam everyone, I'm Daiana Al-Bukhari, a Palestinian from Gaza. Thank you for giving me this platform to speak today. As women around the world celebrate International Women's Day, I feel a mix of pride for the resilience and the strength we exhibit amidst the turmoil of war. Yet, a heavy heart for the challenges and injustices we endure in Gaza. There are some critical issues that are often overlooked by the mainstream. While International Women's Day is meant to celebrate the achievement and the struggles of women worldwide, we must also recognize its limitation. For many women like myself celebrate, this day feels hollow and tokenistic. I've been displaced from my home, as have the majority of people in Gaza, and we are just trying to survive. As a young Palestinian woman, I cannot speak about women's issues without addressing the layers of oppression and injustice that we face daily. Our lives are shaped by occupation, violence, and ethnic cleansing, as well as systemic discrimination. We are denied the basic human rights as basic as shelter, food, and safety, as well as access to education, healthcare, and employment. Our bodies and voices are weaponized against us by occupying forces who have overtaken our communities. Since the 7th of October, Israel has killed almost 30,000 people in Gaza, including more than 11,500 children and 8,000 women. The impact of oppression in our daily lives cannot be overstated. Palestinian women are disproportionately affected by the disruption of education, with schools and universities destroyed. Employment opportunities are scarce due to the discriminatory practices and economic devastation caused by occupation. The destruction of medical infrastructure has meant that access to healthcare has been close to non-existent. Women are giving birth with no medical support. Menstrual care has been horrific, with women being forced to use whatever they can find to use as sanitary pads. While mainstream feminism has made strides in advocating human rights, it often fails to address the intersecting forms of oppression faced by the majority of women in the world. White feminist ideology centered around the experience of privileged women in the global north can be exclusionary and perpetuate colonial narratives. International Women's Day, in the current forms, often ignores the struggles of women in the global south and reinforces a narrow, Eurocentric perspective of feminism. As we reflect on International Women's Day, let us think about the reason we care about each other and commit to amplifying the voices of women, including Palestinian women, and work towards disseminating the system of oppression that affect us all. Together, we can build a world where every woman, regardless her race, religion, or nationality, can live free from violence, discrimination, and injustice. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Dearest gratitude to Daiana and pray for her ongoing safety and security. She did share a story on her Instagram account this morning, only 8 hours ago, where she stated, "We are the ball and Gaza is the field, with two sides seeking victory. From the intensity of kicking this ball, it has become crippled, destined for death, while the world is a spectator, applauding one side and condemning the other. She's a fierce advocate. Thank you. Please join me next up in welcoming Dr. Leticia Funston, who provided an overview of the Seeds of Resistance preliminary report. Leticia is an intersectional anti-colonial feminist and a social researcher. She's a qualified social worker and has worked many years as an academic advisor, researcher, and trainer, developing resources at the intersections between systemic and institutionalized racism, gendered violence, and settler colonialism and neoliberalism. Thank you, Dr. Funston.
I just wanted to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land and their elders, past and present. This always was, this always will be Aboriginal land. And from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It's an incredible honour to be here today to present the Seeds of Resistance preliminary report. And I just want to say this is a piece of work that I've been so incredibly humbled and so incredibly proud to have been involved with. And I just wanted to offer my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to Hajjeh, Maha, to Gina, to Gaith, to Fida, and to Namat. It's such a true honour to work with you all on this piece. So the report presents the key findings from a community survey that was conducted just last month in February. And the survey was developed by MWA, and it came about because MWA were acutely aware of the magnitude of racism, humiliation, injustice, and betrayal, as well as disavowed grief that was and continues to be experienced, particularly by Australian, Palestinian, Muslim, and Arab people. And so the survey was open for just 1 week and it received a staggering 72 responses, which really is impressive given the very short time frame. On average, participants spent about 50 minutes completing the survey, which is again remarkable. Participants gave feedback that although the survey was really challenging to complete, that it was much needed and that many participants expressed their thanks to MWA for doing this work. As Namat has already said, the ideas behind the survey questions were informed by the work of the Centre for Response-Based Practice and Insight Exchange. And we really focused on the idea that for every act of violence, there is always an act of resistance. And that's why we asked participants to describe, in particular, what it has meant to participants for them to witness the dignity of Palestinian people and specifically the dignity of Palestinian men, women and children as they resist and respond to this, as they resist this genocide. And the community responses that we received are incredibly important. I just want to say one participant, and I quote, I am Palestinian. I know how dignity is very important to us. Women, men and children, they are very strong. But these images and videos of the genocide have absolutely broken my heart. As a young Palestinian woman with parents who grew up in the West Bank, I feel immensely proud of the strength and resistance of the people of my homeland, end quote. And the survey also asked participants to share experiences of and their resistance to racism being experienced in Australia and around the world right now in response to this. And the findings are particularly disturbing. And this is something we really need to be listening to and really need to be responding to. Over half of the participants reported experiencing racism and Islamophobia. 1 in 3 people reported feeling afraid of losing their job for speaking out and sharing content about their views on Palestine, both within and outside of the workplace. Participants also described the efforts that they have had to go to stay safe from racist abuse and harassment. Many participants saying that they're avoiding using public transport right now, doing online shopping so they don't have to go to the shops, and many people saying that they are having to be strategically silent. They've been silenced. 90% of participants felt a strong sense of betrayal in relation to Australian politicians and how they have responded to Israeli attacks against Palestine. Over half of participants said the mainstream media responses to Palestine. Over half of participants said the mainstream media reporting of Palestine has diminished their sense of belonging in Australia. One participant said, and I quote, Now more than ever, as a Muslim, I don't feel like we belong, even though I am born in Australia, end quote. Another participant said, it's like we don't exist. Palestine isn't even being shown on the mainstream media. Sense of belonging is non-existent, but we have never been more proud to be Palestinian. The survey responses also show how all of this is contributing to reduced quality of connection within interpersonal relationships, negatively affecting physical and mental health, their economic security, reducing quality of sleep. One participant summed up this really well in the quote, "The stress of life and what we are seeing has taken its toll. Some nights you cry, some nights you are inspired by what you are seeing, though lately helplessness is impacting me. I'm feeling disillusioned by our leaders and how long it is taking to call for a ceasefire." End quote. Overwhelmingly, this report demonstrates that just like the people of Palestine, all of the people who participated in this survey have been active in resisting violence and racism and active in upholding the dignity and humanity of Palestinian and Muslim people. This report also grounds these experiences within a vitally important historic, social and political context, which I urge you all to read. We all of us have a responsibility here in stopping this genocide, in stopping the occupation, in stopping racism and Islamophobia. We must do whatever we can to nurture the seeds of resistance for a free Palestine and to defend human rights and dignity for everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Funston, for your contributions to the report and your impassionate words. Dr. Helen McCue was awarded the 2023 to 2024 Jerusalem Al-Quds Peace Prize for 41 years of passionate advocacy and support for Palestine through her work with Union Aid Abroad, AFIDA, and the Union Movement. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, who will graciously launch the Seeds of Resistance Preliminary Report, Dr. Helen McCue.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Nemet, and congratulations to Hajjeh, Maha and MWA for initiating this survey. Special thanks to Dr. Krayem and to Leticia Funston and the team who compiled this important Seeds of Resistance report. It is an honour to be asked to launch this insightful and inspiring document. I acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Gundungara people, and I pay my respects to all elders, both past, present and emerging. This land was stolen and never ceded. Every morning, since October last 7th, I wake up fearful that something terrible has happened in Gaza as I sleep. Sorry. And I find each day that my fears and anxiety are based on reality. One morning this week, I learned that 15 babies had died from malnutrition, starved of their mother's milk, or because milk supplements are not available as Israel blocks delivery of food and medicine. Yesterday, the Israelis blocked multiple trucks of necessary aid from the World Food Programme. That's so hard to believe. I wake to the news that a mother who tried 11 years to have a child lost her husband and her twin babies, Wissam and Niam, in a bombing in Rafah, designated a safe zone by the Israeli military. I learned that more people are killed by Israel's tanks and sniper fire as they wait for the tiny amount of food allowed into Gaza. But I am not alone with this emotional pain, as this report shows. Muslims, Arabs and other non-Muslim women and men and many young people here and across the world are protesting in their millions over catastrophic situation in Gaza. The slaughter, the killing of at least so many children and the injury and maiming of over 70,000 people. The UN has projected the loss of more than 60,000 people from starvation and communicable diseases. People are mourning and are outraged at the catastrophic failure of healthcare services, the complete destruction of Gaza hospitals, schools, mosques, administrative infrastructure, sewage facilities, universities, internationally renowned archaeological sites by a brutal, vicious, inhumane Israeli military. But as this report shows, it is the silence of colleagues, the abuse from strangers, the legal threats for not speaking out, the real loss of jobs, and the complicity and silence of politicians that is so devastating and heartbreaking. Is this Australia? Sadly, it is. Where is our common humanity? Silence is an act of complicity, complicity in what International Court of Justice says is a high probability of genocide by the Israeli military. Complicity in the International Criminal Court accuses Israel of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Silence in the face of genocide and war crimes is complicity. Why is the Australian government so silent with no comment on the ICJ findings? And why did the government pause aid to UNRWA when to date no evidence has been provided for wrongdoing by Israel? Why, when so many doctors are being murdered and detained, is the AMA silent, and when doctors speaking out, they're reported to the medical board? Where are the churches when the Pope himself called Israelis terrorists? Where are the voices of civil society, of women's organisations, the medical church organisations? Australian Muslims and Arabs and supporters of Palestine are met with silence, and worse, as this report shows. And there is silence too about the situation in the occupied bank that has had little coverage by mainstream media, where Israel continues to arm settlers, expand settlements, confiscate lands, take natural resources, and install settlers in Palestinian populated areas in total violation of its international obligations. And this violation has only accelerated since October last year. In the past 5 months, over 400 Palestinians have been killed, among them 102, and 4,600 have been injured, and thousands have been detained. They estimate up to 7,000 have been detained. There's also extensive damage to people's homes and roads, in particular in the refugee camps. Not only Israeli conducting mass killings of desperate Palestinians and using starvation, mass starvation as a weapon of war, they are also using torture and illegal detention of men and women and girls who've been arbitrarily detained in Gaza and the West Bank. Among these detainees are doctors and other health workers and human rights workers and UNRWA workers. Reporting on February the 19th this year, UN experts and special rapporteurs Reem Al-Salem and Francesca Albanese stated that credible accusations have emerged that Palestinian girls in detention have been subject to multiple forms of sexual assault, such as being stripped naked and raped, while others were threatened with rape and sexual violence. They also noted that photos of female detainees in degrading circumstances were reportedly taken by the Israeli soldiers and uploaded online. They expressed concern that an unknown number of Palestinian women and children, including girls, have gone missing after contact with the Israeli army in Gaza. Quote, there are disturbing reports of at least one female infant being forcibly transferred by the Israeli military into Gaza, and of children being separated from their parents whose whereabouts remain unknown. There are an estimated 19,000 Gazan orphans. There have also been serious reports of women raped by Hamas and other military forces on October the 7th. And although such reports have been reported by the United Nations this week, they still have been denied access to the alleged victims. And while no one can condone brutal murders and abductions by October the 7th, there is always a context. Palestinians have continued for nearly 8 decades since 1948 to resist the Israeli occupation. There have been various peace talks and talks of the Palestinian state, while Israel keeps taking more Palestinian land. There are now 8,000 settlers on the Palestinian land in violation of international law and numerous UN resolutions. These lands have been taken violently and broken up into small, non-continuous enclaves. In 2007, after the Oslo Accords of 1993, that resulted in the formation of the Palestinian National Authority and guaranteed Palestinians some very limited authority in Gaza and the West Bank, elections were held under US supervision, and Hamas won these democratic elections in Gaza. People always forget that. Immediately, the US and Israel resisted this democratic result, and Gaza was put under a siege that has lasted till today. Food was restricted to limited calorific intake, and since the Gaza siege of 2007, children have become smaller and thinner. Critical exports and essential goods, movement of people for work, movement of people for medical care has been seriously curtailed. Gaza is surrounded on three sides by the Israeli military, and they control the sea as well by stopping fishing, a much used source of food and nutrition. Gazans are trapped within an open-air prison, denied basic human rights, deprived of food from Israel for their children to grow properly. They're deprived of economic development and access to advanced medical care. This vicious, inhumane control and destruction of another people's lives is clearly an act of genocide, of apartheid, and of multiple war crimes. This is the context of the October 7th assault. My relationship with Palestinians started in August 1982. Israel had invaded Lebanon on June the 6th of that year, and at that time I was a nurse consultant with the Middle East World Health section of the World Health Organization, based in Alexandria in Egypt. I was asked to go to the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon on secondment with UNRWA, the relief agency for Palestinians. Following the Sabra Shatila Palestinian camp massacre on the 16th and 17th of September that year by Lebanese Christian forces, overseen and aided by Israeli military, where 3,000 old men, women and children were slaughtered, I resigned from the WHO and went as a volunteer to nurse in Gaza in that camp. It was here that I first met Olfat Mahmoud, my dear friend and mentor, who sadly passed away last year. I nursed in the camp hospital for several months, and during that time worked with Olfat and spent time with her and her family in Boja Varashni, living and sleeping there and sharing so many moments of family joy and suffering greatly strengthened my understanding of the Palestinian struggle. Olfat and I became very close, and she taught me many things about Palestinian camp life. She visited Australia numerous times advocating for her people. She first visited MWA in 1985 and several times after that. My own relationship with MWA, and especially with Hajj Maha and Gina, goes back nearly 4 decades and has shaped and strongly influenced my insights and understandings of the difficulties, but also the dignity and resilience of Muslim women in Australia. I stayed in Beirut for about 6 months and returned to Australia, where in January 1984, with the help of the then President ACTU Cliff Dolan, President of the ACTU Cliff Dolan, a feeder, now known as Union Aid, a broader feeder, was established. Since then, these past 40 years, a feeder has projects worldwide, but in Lebanon, we work in the camps with the Palestinian Women's Organisation, supporting women and children, that Olfat set up in 1993. In the occupied territories, we have continued to work with local partners based in Ramallah since 1987. The Maha Development Centre is our key partner, and they work across the OPT, where several of their projects are with women. They also work in Gaza, where presently, in spite of great personal and material losses and loss of family members, they continue to assist with humanitarian work there. This important report that I'm privileged to launch inspires all of us to learn from Palestinian women, men and children who love and support one another, who express their resistance daily with great dignity and immense compassion and faith that remains in spite of the apartheid, the genocide, the horrific loss of life and injury and inhumane suffering they are enduring. Australian Muslim and Arab women are also living with faith, dignity and resilience, as this report details, in spite of the silencing, the Islamophobic abuse, the discrimination and harassment they have been subject to, and the failure of colleagues, government officials, the media, and federal and state governments to recognise their pain and suffering. It is my great privilege, indeed, to launch this important and insightful report, and I urge all of you listening to read it in full. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have some lived experience accounts. Mariam Dawwas is a Palestinian journalist who arrived recently in Australia from Gaza, Palestine, with her mother, daughter, and sisters.
Thank you for having me. Mariam Dawwas. I'm 31 years old. I'm a mom of a 5 years old kid, Sophie. It's very, very, very hard to go out of Gaza in the current situation, but alhamdulillah, we've made it, and we're here now in Australia, seeking shelter and seeking safety above all. I did my studies in Al-Azhar University. I studied English, French literature, and then I went for an undergraduate program in New York, and then came back to Gaza. I have been working in two domains, different domains. The one is journalism, and I was a fixer for the international foreign media journalists who come to Gaza. And the other thing that I worked in is project management. I was, the world of human rights and human rights conventions and all things that it just failed.
Yeah.
And I don't really believe in it anymore. No, this time it was really, really painful because I grew up as a kid asking, when we studied what happened in Nakba in 1948. Every time I see what happened or read a story about a massacre or how people got like displaced and thrown out of their lands, and how they stole our towns and our houses and everything. I always had that question: where the Arab country, where the Arabs were, or not the Arabs, the world. Where was the world? Okay, but then I was telling myself maybe there wasn't enough media coverage. Maybe they didn't know about it. Maybe they weren't making it out loud and saying and telling people about it. But then this genocide happened. While everything was posted online on social media and everyone saw everything. I myself, when I went to New York, I had to go to Jerusalem to make my visa, my American visa, because we don't have an American consulate in Gaza. We only have the American consulate in Jerusalem. So I had to go to Jerusalem for the first time in my life because we're not allowed by the Israelis to go there. And then for me to go, they didn't allow me. We were applying 2 months before my interview with the consulate. And they said just like this, for her, and they were conducting the program in the US. They said for her to come to Jerusalem, she has to go through a security interview with the Israeli Shabak.
Yeah.
So that was really terrifying for me because I was just like 21 years old when I went, and I thought of canceling everything, of giving up my dream of studying in New York. But then I decided to go, and it was the worst day in my life because I was humiliated. I was taken to a place that I don't know, and if they decide to keep me there, no one would ever know where I am. So everything is really complicated because we are controlled. All the borders are controlled by Israel. So whenever you want to go out for any reason, you have to take their approval, and it is not that easy. I cannot feel that I'm a woman that have rights and enjoy that and celebrate that because I only think of women just like me in Gaza. Now I left, I'm safe, I can get Sophie whatever she wants, so I only now think of the people in Gaza, the women who are in the north, who are who they are being starved, and their children are starving, and they cannot do anything for them, and they're just watching this happen, and everyone is silent. So I can't really speak about women's rights and everything while this is happening because they are very basic rights. The rights of safety, the rights of having food, medical care. You know that I know some of women who give birth in cesarean section without anesthesia.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? My friend just gave birth in Gaza on a chair. We don't have that. If you are a woman, then you don't get educated. Everyone gets educated. We go to schools, we go to universities, and we pay for it. It's very expensive, but it is a priority for all the families in Gaza. When you talk to a father in Gaza Strip, asking him what is the most important thing for you, he would tell you that he thinks only of getting his girls and sons, his daughters and sons. All my friends are working women. My friend is a journalist like me. The other friend is a doctor. My sister is a doctor. My two sisters are doctors. The other one is a dentist, and the fifth one is still studying. Men and women are being detained. I want to call it. It's not detention. It's kidnapping. They kidnap women, and they are Muslim women. They make them take off hijab and their clothes, and they are tortured, and I cannot tell you what happens inside that prisons, and they face no charges. They are not accused of anything. They're just detained and kidnapped, and no one knows what is going to happen to them, because no one is there, because you think they're dead, maybe, and maybe they're dead, maybe they were kidnapped, and no one would ask. No one has the ability to investigate or to ask the Israelis what would happen to these women. So I think that we should like shed light on this, because it's like you cannot imagine their suffering and what they do to them, the sexual abuse, and they torture them during interrogation, and it is like they suffer the most. I think they suffer the most. It is the only thing that helped me, because I was going insane. I was losing control in that period. I was only praying, making dua, and asking God, maybe that faith is what made me balanced, because otherwise I would be crazy. I was always telling myself, just wait and see, because God is there, and I was asking him always, just to protect Sophie. And I consider myself that I have a good faith. I trust God, and I have confidence that whatever happens, everyone will pay for it, for their mistakes. And I believe until now it is going insane. It's a genocide. People are killed. They are being starved. Everything, but there's an end for all of this, and people will take their rights. I'm sure of that. And the only thing that what was making me feel that is my faith in God, that everything is gonna be okay at the end.
And can you?
MWA has been engaging and supporting Palestinians across all the Abrahamic faiths. We did invite some non-Muslim families to share their stories, but we accept their decision not to do so. This is not a religious issue. Palestinians should not be discriminated against because of their race nor their faith. I'd like to welcome now Dr. Sarah Abdo, who is a specialist endocrinologist in Sydney. She was born in Australia and completed her studies at the University of Sydney. She's the daughter of a 1948 Palestinian, and combining her heritage with her role as a healthcare professional, she feels she has no choice but to speak out against the genocide taking place in Gaza. Welcome, Dr. Sarah.
Thank you, Namat. Thank you for asking me to speak today. First of all, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we meet on and speak on, and acknowledge that this is unceded land. I'm very sorry. I did not expect to get emotional again. This has been 5 months. I'm going to uplift the mood in honour today of International Women's Day. And I want to call out, a shout out to all of the amazing, resilient, outspoken Palestinian women who do not need saviours. We do not need Western feminism. We do not need your colonialism. We do not need your words. We can stand strong. We can shout out our own message to the world. We are proud to be Palestinian. I am thankful to be Australian. I am lucky that I am safe in my home. But today we remember all the fallen women in this conflict. We remember the ones that are struggling to survive in the camps, the ones that are suffocating under the occupation of the West Bank. We remember the warriors that are detained unlawfully and still remain in detention with nobody calling for their release. We will never forget. Myself, naively, I would say that before October 2023, I was under the impression that medicine was something of a universally sacred institution, especially universally sacred during wartime. I thought that the explicit targeting of medical infrastructure would not be tolerated, or would at least be unequivocally condemned across the world. I take you back to when people ask me, what made you start speaking out? I mean, the question is, how could you not speak out? In the aftermath, very early on, I know now we're talking in history, on October 17, when Al-Ahli hospital was bombed. This served as a point of rupture and litmus test. I was surprised initially to see that there was some reporting about this.
and that some people were condemning this attack. Before the ground invasion of Israel, the final death toll was almost 500 people. 500 people massacred inside the hospital. In the immediate wake of the attack, I'll draw you back. You may recall Palestinian doctors held a press conference outside the hospital where they had just been treating patients. They stood there surrounded by a sea of dead bodies, covered in the colourful winter blankets, which we all will have etched in our brain right now, those colourful blankets that they use to cover the bodies. In one respect, to preserve the dignity of the victims without minimising the ability of the viewers from around the world to see the enormity of the crime. And you would recall during that time, while they were doing their press conference, they had to move that press conference twice because the impunity of this force that attacked these doctors during the conference. Then that was followed by lies and retractions and people making excuses and laws. And do you know what we saw then after that? We saw multiple hospitals destroyed. In fact, 364 healthcare workers have been killed in this conflict. Almost 300 have been arrested. 300 arrests, many of whom eventually get released after months of torture. In my mind, I remember the story of a pediatrician who was detained for more than a month, and he came out and he's working immediately in the pediatric hospital helping his patients. These people are not like any other people we've seen. These people have a resilience, and the resilience and the strength of these people is what makes us stand up. For me personally, I was introduced as a 1948 Palestinian. This was a term that I really only came to grapple with during this conflict. And the reason that really resonated with me is because before this conflict, although I knew what happened and I knew the history of the Nakba, and I knew that my father, my grandmother gave birth to my father on the official day of the commencement of the Israeli state, May 15th, 1948. I knew she gave birth to him in Jaffa, in the occupied territories. But I didn't really grasp what it meant that he lived in Khan Younis in a refugee camp for a few years. And then I didn't really grasp that that meant that my grandparents were like these people sitting in these refugee camps, and then that they gave up and realized they're never going back to Jaffa, and they make the decision that these people are now making, and they move to Egypt. And then with that move, again, the life opportunities were not there for them because no matter what, they are refugees. So my father was lucky enough to make Australia his home, hence why I'm born in Australia and I am the product of the Nakba of 1948. I am very thankful for the opportunities in Australia, but what I am not thankful for, I am not thankful for the silence of our medical bodies, and I'm not thankful for a government that absolutely disregards human rights. This has been an absolute litmus test because without the ability to speak up on a publicly televised genocide for 5 months, what does that leave? What does that leave? The structures of human rights that we've been building, the belief we have in our systems has been completely crushed. What I would also like to say is that, in fact, our government has not only not said very clearly and unequivocally and not taken the actions that we need. No, they have aided and abetted this genocide. And I am very happy to see that they will be brought to answer to their crimes and their responsibilities. I will take the time, since there may be some people from government on board, and I am not afraid to call out the Australian government because they don't seem to be very keen to respond to our emails or our telephone calls. And I would urge our government to use the diplomatic measures possible to halt the attacks, to ask you to prevent further genocide. The other thing I would like to highlight is that we have had the longest running time of peaceful protest, 5 months of peaceful protest, and yet still nothing. As medical practitioners, we take an oath. We uphold medical ethics, and our first tenet of medical ethics is non-maleficence. First, do no harm. There is much harm being done in Palestine, so we strongly urge our leaders to do their utmost to prevent the further death, injury, and destruction. I will not stop using my voice for those that are not being heard. I'm not afraid to use my voice. Unfortunately, our medical bodies have been deafeningly silent. Absolute silence. Medical neutrality is a condition that everybody comes to expect in war times, and calling out the targeting of medical facilities has absolutely happened in every other situation. Most recently, Ukraine. All the medical bodies made a statement about Ukraine. Nobody will make a statement about Palestine. It is embarrassing that at 5 months, not only have we seen all the actual genocide and all of the targeted killings and abductions and abuse, we are now going to see the effects of malnutrition and starvation. Helen already mentioned we've had at least 15 children that have died from malnourishment and dehydration already. This is not a famine. This is not a natural disaster. This is an enforced starvation. Finally, what we have been doing as medical practitioners is calling on our bodies. Most recently, just yesterday, 2 of my colleagues wrote an article in The Lancet that was published calling on medical bodies in Australia and around the world to speak up for genocide, to speak up against what's been happening. When we do call out bodies, people will make a statement, but then at the end, they'll say something to bring across their neutrality. There is no neutrality in this. So I'm going to end with this statement, and I'm not afraid to say it. Are we so scared of being called anti-Semitic time and time again, so we have our mouths taped shut and we end up sitting on a neutral island surrounded by an ocean of blood? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah, for your courage and your commitment and using your voice so purposefully. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I welcome now Farah Abdurahman, a former political reporter for Fairfax Media. She has almost 20 years of media and communications experience in senior and executive roles, working across government, research and innovation and the private sector to share her experiences and perspectives.
Assalamu alaikum. I just want to thank Hajeh, Maha and Muslim Women Australia for considering me among this very impressive cohort of women who are speaking today, and a warm welcome to everyone who is listening in. I'm speaking to you from the Darawal Nation. I want to acknowledge the traditional landowners here and also acknowledge that this was never ceded land. It always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Look, I'm not as prepared as the other speakers. I was asked to talk about my media experience and what it's been like voicing my concerns about what's happening. And I find myself incredibly emotional listening to the report, the findings, which is content I've been heavily ingrained in for the past 5 months. It's hard to watch. It's certainly going to leave residual mental health issues in all of us. And I would like to take a moment just to reach out to all of the women to say, encourage one another and create a bit of a support base, because we are all in it together. So just a little bit about who I am. I am a South African coloured woman who was born into apartheid. I come from a long legacy of strong political advocates who fought against apartheid, and anyone who knows anything about the apartheid in South Africa will know. So, you will know that great men such as Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu call this out for what it is. They said Palestine is an apartheid state. Not only did they make that acknowledgement, they also stated that it's a far more horrific and brutal apartheid regime than what we experience in South Africa, for one very simple reason, which is the Israelis don't need the local workforce the way that the white South African government did. And, further to that, when South Africa was liberated from apartheid in the early 90s, Nelson Mandela said, "We are not free until Palestine is free," which is why I have taken this as my personal mission that's given me purpose to speak for an oppressed people, especially our women and our children. I'm sorry, I'm very emotional today. So I haven't worked as a journalist for some time. I actually made the decision to leave Fairfax about a decade ago because at that time I recognised that Australian media was controlled by a duopoly. There's a significant lack of diversity in Australian media. We're looking at very much Zionist-led media, which is controlled by Lord Rothermere or Rupert Murdoch, who, as we know, owns the largest mansion in Tel Aviv and has been successfully evading Australian tax laws by funding Alia for decades. I couldn't work for someone like that. So I actually moved into corporate communications, and that's where I suppose Hajeh Maha wants me to talk about what my experience was. So after spending a long time in senior media advisory roles in government, in relation to what Dr. Sarah Abdo said, Al-Ahli Hospital was bombed, and I used my platform, my professional platform, to oppose what I said was a brutal violation of international law. Within 13 minutes, I had been trolled by Zionist members of the society. My post had been screenshot and sent to the likes of Ray Hadley and the Daily Mail. And that was the last day I worked for the Department of Communities and Justice, which is incredibly ironic given it's a Department of Communities and Justice. We've heard ongoing rhetoric from our Premier, who has unequivocally supported Israel's attack and defended their right to defend themselves, which is incredibly ironic given international law says something completely different as an occupying power. And I suppose what ensued from there was, how do I respond? Okay, now I've lost my job. I then subsequently lost my house. I was out of work for a long time. I was called a rape apologist, a terrorist supporter, an anti-Semite. I've never in my life said a word about the Jewish faith, and I do recognize my Jewish brothers and sisters as members of Abrahamic faith. I find that incredibly difficult to swallow. And you're almost put in a position where you now have to determine, okay, are you going to allow this experience to silence you and to scare you into their complicity? And it's just not who I am. So alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he puts us where we need to be, and he puts us in positions where we can create difference and speak up on behalf of these situations. And that's where I find myself today. I'm working for a fantastic organization that supports advocacy work. My director himself has spent time in the West Bank. He's an Irish man who gets apartheid. He spent time in the West Bank, and he's quite happy for me to continue my advocacy work, which now extends to situations like this, but also providing some political contributed pieces to Michael West Media so that we can have our narrative told in our words and in the way that we need it to be told, outside of the propaganda and the agenda being pushed by the capitalist secular West. And that's not to create divisiveness. It's really just to look at what is blatantly obvious, which is a divide in how media is consumed. And I think there are some key takeaways for the entire community here, which is one, invest in independent media. Invest in independent media where you can, because you're more likely to get the truth from independent media sources, which are a lot of the time self-funded. Learn to critically think and teach your children to critically think. Children have got access to information at the tip of their fingers, whether it's on a keyboard or an iPad or their phone. Teach them to use those resources to critically think, to interrogate information. What we don't want to do is raise a generation of sheeple. We want to teach our kids to challenge misinformation and to understand that what they're being told is not necessarily the truth. This experience has entirely broken down long-standing fundamental belief that the government will not lie to us, that the government has our best interests at heart, that the government would stand up for human rights and dignity and international law because this is their institution and this is what they tell us they do. But all it's really done is reinforce the fact that if you come from a minority or you represent a minority, then those rights don't belong to you. Feminism? No, that doesn't belong to you. Basic human rights? No, you don't get that. Food, water, and electricity? Sorry, you're a human animal. And unfortunately, the reality of that sentiment is that any brown person, anyone who comes from an Arab background, anyone who identifies as Muslim is now dumped into that. And we're experiencing incredible amounts of Islamophobia. I had a conversation with a colleague a few weeks ago, and I said, it's taken them 20 years post 9/11 to determine the definition of Islamophobia under anti-vilification or racial vilification laws. Yet they changed the definition for anti-Semitism overnight to include criticism of Israel and Zionism. Like, how is that even possible? What we need to do as professionals within our space is call out the bias and injustice. We need to hold those who are making decisions accountable for their blatant bias and their unequivocal support for what is now a plausible genocide. I think what we're also seeing a lot of within the Australian community is we're seeing a huge rally of support from people that we didn't really feel supported by. I think this is the great divider of now. It's people, you know, it's not Muslims and Arabs and Palestinians. It's actually those who oppose genocide, apartheid, and illegal occupation, and those who don't. And I think you will find overwhelmingly that people do support our position. Anyone who has a sense of conscience will support human rights in whatever form it exists. And I know that we are over time, and I just wanted to touch on one additional point, which is, and I did mention this to Fida Abdo, I can't see her now, but it's, you know, as an immigrant woman, I came here during apartheid, actually, and I came as a political, under a political visa, seeking asylum. And I think for myself, not being born here, being an immigrant or being a refugee or being an asylum seeker, coming to a Western country or coming to any country, you know, we are fed this consistent message: you need to integrate, you need to assimilate, you need to integrate, you need to assimilate. And then gosh, I've been here over 33 years. It's taken me closer to 4 decades to realize that their need for me to assimilate and integrate is to make them feel comfortable with my existence in their society. It's taken me almost 4 decades to realize that I will never be considered more than a second-class citizen because I don't look like them and I don't represent what they represent. And again, this is not to create divisiveness. This is just to highlight the blatant discrimination that exists within our society, which is often whitewashed. You know, it's taken me, again, almost 4 decades to realize that it's okay for me to be a Muslim and wear a hijab. And if I'm going to get criticism in the workplace, I'm going to get it either way, because me impersonating their behavior doesn't make me any more or less accepted. And I don't know if anyone else resonates with that message. But for me, it was a really stark awakening, actually. And I'm very new to the hijab, so I apologize if I'm offending anyone with my hair sticking out. But you know, I made that decision because I realized ultimately that I'm always going to be the Black African Muslim girl in the workplace. I'm more than likely always going to be the diversity hire. So you know what? I'm going to play my card. That's my card, and I'm going to play it.
Farah, thank you so much for sharing so authentically and raw, in such a raw way, your personal experiences, and also, you know, the silencing and the misinformation and the gendered repercussions that women are facing here, and the conditional and contextualized application of what we see time and time again as what actually is institutionalized racism. So thank you so much. Hajeh Maha, Abdo, can you please thank and close, and then we do have a short spoken word for those who can stay on if they wish to watch it. Thank you.
I think I just want to thank each and every one of you from all walks of life, from all governments and non-government organisations that have joined us today. Please make sure that you know that you have a voice and you've heard it raw. Like, we've not sat here and we've not filtered anything. All you're hearing right now, where I think from my experience of 40 years in the sector, it is about time that we share what we're feeling. That I don't want to numb it down anymore. You know, I just want to say it as is, but with respect, and while holding each other's dignity, because I feel like our heart is like a candle. You know, when you light up one candle, you can light up everyone's candle. But remember, we don't want to burn each other. We want to warm each other. And on that note, I want to take that warmth and ask you to be active in going forward. That requires from all of us, from the grassroots activism to international advocacy. Each one of us has a voice, and each one of us must use that voice. Let us use this momentum of International Women's Day 2024 to recommit to the fight for justice. And I call it fight because it's no longer just sitting here peacefully. We sit here peacefully, but thinking about how justice is going to be really, really regained, recollected. Not just for Palestinian women, but for every individual facing the scourge of violence and oppression, right? So let's remember that our actions and our voices can and will, inshallah, sow the seeds of change. That's what we're calling for, and that's what we can. With hope and dignity, we can stand together. And standing together, we can foster a world where no one is a silent bystander to violence. And for 50 years in the sector, we've talked about bystander abuse. And I am witnessing it right now. I can see it with all my young mentorees, and I can hear Farah, I can see Dr. Sarah, Namat, Gina. Every one of them has been a source of energy and vibration for me to move forward with this, to see that bystander is something that we need to call it out, where every woman, man and child is counted. Again, we're not just bodies, okay, to be counted. And where dignity, justice and peace are not just ideals that we think about. We sit here, we reflect, but we need to be really, really, really taking action. Let this be our pledge, to move forward with courage, to speak out with conviction, and to act with compassion. Together, we can make a difference, because together we are better.
عربيتي مكسورة. My Arabic is so broken. Like cracked teeth when you bite down on an olive pit too hard. Like shattered tea glass, bursting chestnuts, bombed buildings. When I speak my Arabic, I am tongue-tied, tangled necklaces, stutters and mutters and sorries, the hat getting stuck in my throat like a gasping cat trying to escape the rubble. My second grade vocabulary tumbles down with the minarets. My Arabic is broken. A nation at war. The heart of a grieving mother whose grandchild hasn't called in years. When a Russian missile hit my aunt's house in Syria, my Arabic collapsed with the building on her body. When they pulled it out, it was unrecognizable, mangled. When it came time to pay my condolences, I didn't have any Arabic left. And even though English was all I had, I dismissed it as this counterfeit currency. Decided that all I could afford that day was silence. And so I said nothing in every language that I knew. It took me 5 years to write this poem. And here I am with the mouth of an infant, rummaging through the rubble of my father's tongue, trying to articulate from scratch and untangle these necklaces, jumle by jumle, sentence by sentence. ما بعرف شلون بس ححاول. I don't know how, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna learn to give my condolences to every nation on this earth, from Syria to Sudan, from El Salvador to Seattle. I will use this shrapnel Arabic, this loose change English, whatever I have to pay my condolences. Because I've learned that silence costs so much more. عربيتي مكسورة. My Arabic is so broken, like cracked teeth when you bite down on an olive pit too hard. But I'm gonna keep on trying, even if all my teeth are broken.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's International Women's Day's event. Peace and blessings to you all.